Thank you so much for introducing me and for inviting me, Una, and everyone else involved in this conference. I just want to check first if my sound and video is okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and also video is fine.
Perfect. The reason I'm asking is because I'm calling in from Portugal, southwest Portugal, and usually my internet connection is very stable. But today, for mysterious reasons, there is a massive storm happening. So if you see lightnings and thunderbolts, that's because of the weather conditions. It's rainy and pretty intense. I'm using 4G internet, that's why the internet may be a bit stable. Okay, so let's jump into this. There's a lot to share, so I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation immediately. I'm really sad that I couldn't make it to Riga, by the way. I want to start by saying that. I really saw this at first as an opportunity to travel and visit your beautiful country for the first time, because I always wanted to. But I had family responsibilities that were exactly happening in this week, so I really needed to stay where I am. So I only have about 30 minutes for this presentation, and therefore I'm going to just jump straight into it with one really important warning. This is actually a 2-hour presentation. I tried to condense it into 30 minutes, and I think it'll be fine. I'll watch the clock, but it does mean that from time to time I will zoom out and I will skip some slides to make sure that I can get to the points I want to share. And it also means that sometimes I will simply summarize things rather than going into a lot of details. So many of you have heard of my organization, Wavepaths. We do 3 things, just as a little means of introduction. We do scientific research, we develop therapeutic models around the use of music in psychedelic therapy, and we are developing technologies, and we have developed a music tool that is currently being used in more than 300 clinics around the world, delivering music for psychedelic therapy. This talk is only about the science, so I'm not going to talk about all of the other things. I'm not sure if you hear that, but there's a lot of thundering happening on the background, so I need to raise my voice from time to time. I will not talk about the clinical work. I will not talk about the technology that we have developed. I will really focus on the science, specifically the science around the use of music in the context of psychedelic therapy. Therefore, this talk will cover a range of different disciplines. I will really borrow from different fields of research, fields such as music cognition, music neuroscience, developmental neuroscience, clinical psychology, and even a bit of evolutionary psychology here and there. As I said before, we're not going to talk about clinical use, we're not going to talk about the product, we're not going to go into depth in the immensely fascinating history of psychedelics and music. We may do that another time. And this is, briefly speaking, the overview. There's 3 things I'll be doing. I will continue sharing a little prelude of sorts, a little introduction before we go into more details. Then I will zoom into what I really came to be believing and to feel really confident in, to be one of the most promising findings in psychedelic therapy research, grounded in some of the neuroscience research that both myself and other colleagues have been doing. And then in a final chapter, I will bring this all together, I'll try to bring this all together into explaining the functions, the role of music in psychedelic therapy. So why study psychedelics and music to begin with? That may be a question that comes to mind, and I like to start with that. It may, for some of you, sound like a very obvious question, but it hasn't always been an obvious question. And I'm going to share and illustrate this with a cartoon that you can read in your own time. This is Maria Sabina, who famously shared the secrets of the traditional use of magic mushrooms in Mexico with Gordon Wasson, who then brought it to Europe and the US. Now, this is a bit of a dark joke. I hope you don't mind my dark humor. And I may want to add a bit of context to it. The the paradigm that is developing around how to use psychedelics therapeutically and clinically is so extremely different, I dare to say, than conventional psychiatry and conventional psychotherapy, that one of the biggest challenges is how can we integrate the use of these very potential medicines in modern medical healthcare. What to do when there are challenging experiences that patients experience, what to do when people don't like the music, and so forth and so on. I'm really convinced that if we try to mold psychedelics and psychedelic therapy in the current structures of psychiatry as they are, that it's a recipe for disaster, that there is an ongoing conversation that needs to happen between both fields of research, both disciplines, so to speak. Why is that? Well, we are in essence dealing with the question, how can we guide people through altered states of consciousness, which is essential to this model? How can we integrate a model that is so different, as I said before, in the dominant models at play? How can we agree together to work with psychedelics in a way that's not only effective, but also safe and also ethical? How can we learn, and one may even say relearn as a society, as a culture, to work with altered states of consciousness therapeutically? I really came to believe this is at the heart, the essence of the challenge of integrating psychedelic therapy in our modern world, so to speak. I think many of you have seen this image. If not, you will see it probably a lot more from here on. This is an image that for me was really a bit of a game changer in my own career. I got interested in studying psychedelics in 2005, and I started my PhD. No, I started my PhD actually a bit later, 2012, but I started to work at Imperial College London in 2011. And I saw this image, and it's an image where a participant is undergoing a psychedelic therapy session with psilocybin, more specifically. And it's an image taken at Johns Hopkins University. You've got Marina Cosimano and Bill Richards facilitating this session for this individual. And as you can see, the individual has an eye mask, meaning all of the visual perception is blocked. The only perception that is there is the perception of the inner subjective world and maybe the sensation of lying on a couch. But then on top of that, the individual wears a headphone, meaning that music is almost the only stimulus that patients are exposed to during these therapy sessions. And that really blew my mind. And at that time, it really stunned me. I found it incredibly remarkable that no one was asking questions like, why do we play music in psychedelic therapy to begin with? What is the role of music in psychedelic therapies? How may I go about selecting the right music for my patients? But I also came to see that there are maybe even more deeper, more fundamental questions that emerge alongside. And this is really what I'd like to focus on for the coming minutes in this talk. Because this really has to do with our effort to understand what the core therapeutic mechanisms are that underlie psychedelic therapy. What is it, in other words, that makes psychedelic therapy more effective than others? I think it's a question mark that I have later. What is the role of experiencing in psychedelic therapy? We see a lot of research that claim that the subjective qualities of the drug experience is important therapeutically. But why and how may that be the case? And is that true to begin with? So this is it. This is really what I basically am saying with all of these words is we need to find through science, through good scientific research, a shared understanding, a shared agreed understanding what it is that makes psychedelic therapy effective and how we can work with it in a safe way as well as in an ethical way. And this is what I'd like to start with in this next chapter. Let's see. This was for me, and I think many people that entered this field of research, so incredibly interesting. If you look at many of these clinical trials, the duration in which patients have reductions in symptoms for months and years after they had the therapeutic intervention is very unusual if you compare it with other mental health care paradigms and treatments. Classical antidepressants need to be taken every day, and only after a few weeks we see some effect, if we're lucky, on reduction of symptoms if the patient responds. There's a lot of non-responders. Of course, there's non-responders in psychedelic therapy as well, as we will potentially explore together. But the finding that there are a few sessions that patients have, and then years later, people are still better. But that is very remarkable, and it was for me really a strong motivation to study psychedelic therapy, to finish my neuroscience degree and study psychedelic therapy. Now, what I'm going to do here, for the sake of time, is I'm going to go through the slides a little bit quickly to make a point. This was a really important, game-changing paper published in 2006. I remember the moment it came out, paper by Ronan Griffith, demonstrating that psilocybin can facilitate experiences that are incredibly personally meaningful. In this one study, they reported that 87% rated their experience with psilocybin to be in the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their lives. This is pretty incredible. And I will now, like I warned you all about, zoom out a little bit and make the statements more in a summarized fashion. You still see my screen, right? There we go. And this finding has been replicated. This is the main point I want to make. I'm not going to go through all the research that I have been reviewing here for you. If you want, you can make screenshots, and I'm sure I also understood this as being recorded, so you can slow down and look at the references. But I'm just going to speed up a little bit and show you the amount of research that has been done, demonstrating the same effect over and over again. Long-term meaningfulness is unrelated to the intensity of the drug effects, but it's related to certain qualities in the experience. In other words, out of the range of different experiences that people can have with these drugs, a wide range of different experiences, there are only certain experiences that are correlated with those long-term improvements. This has been demonstrated for smoking cessation studies. There's about 2 studies, 1 pilot study, and there's I believe the clinical, the randomized double-blind clinical trial is currently ongoing. And we see the same with, that was with, whoa. I'm still live, huh? Yeah, okay. I wonder if I should be worried about my own life here, because I'm on the top of a hill giving this presentation in the storm. Anyway, let's see if I can stay focused. Maybe it's my dark humor to be punished. I should have started a bit more lighter to start. This is psilocybin. This is cocaine. This is cocaine craving being treated with ketamine. Sorry.
Mendel, can you share your slides? Could it be possible for you to share the slides?
Sorry, I thought I was sharing them. That's exactly what I was. Thank you so much for letting me know, because I thought I was sharing slides all the time. So I was showing these images, and this is the warning I was giving, because I'm going through them relatively quickly. Psilocybin being used to quit smoking, ketamine being used to quit cocaine craving, same effects. The quality of the subjective experience is predictive for long-term remission. Psilocybin being used to treat anxiety and depression. Another study, same effect. Another study, similar effects. Not mystical type experiences being measured here, but again, experiences that are considered to be strongly personally significant. Another study looking at reductions in anxiety and depression, mediated here by the degree to which people experience insightfulness. Long-term improvements in well-being mediated by mystical type experiences. Long-lasting positive effects being mediated by, again, mystical type experiences, being defined here as a sense of connection with the universe, familial love, and experience of profound beauty. Long-term changes in personality structure, also mediated by the quality in the experience. Second study, validating this again and again. There's even more research that I won't go into for the sake of time. This is one of the, maybe is becoming one of the most reliable replications in clinical research. So in summary, it's fair to conclude with the evidence that we have at this moment that psychedelic therapy seems to be an experience-based therapy. Personal meaningfulness of the acute experience seems to be an important, if not key, mediator to facilitate long-term improvements in mental health and well-being. And the graph on the right here is a summary of all the different studies that I just highlighted. Now, some people in the field are arguing that there's not enough evidence for the importance of experience-based, experience-dependent changes and how they are separate from the so-called neuropharmacological effects. The only way we can do that is potentially by giving people an anesthetic. There's actually a recent study published that did this, which I only came across a few days ago, that I should actually weave into this presentation, thinking about it. And that was with ketamine. Now, what I'm going to argue here for is that these two models are not, they're not excluding each other. They're in fact supporting each other. So we need to be reminded that the serotonin 2A system, so in the brain, I'm assuming that not everyone in the audience is a neuroscientist, so I'm going to maybe take a step back. We have a lot of different neurotransmitters in our brains and in our bodies that are modulating the way that neurons process information. The serotonin system is a large family of different types of receptors that are having different expressions in different parts of the brain, and the serotonin 2A receptor is the receptor, we are coming to believe, that is mostly responsible for the subjective effects of classic psychedelics, such as psilocybin, which is most studied for the use in depression. In other words, a lot of studies are done that show that if you block the serotonin 2A receptor in the brain, you also abolish these subjective effects. Very interesting. We need to be reminded that the serotonin 2A receptor system specifically is linked with learning and neuroplasticity. I'm not going to go into details in all these studies, I just show you a few, but there's a lot of interesting research that shows that stimulation of the serotonin 2A receptor is also linked with the regeneration of nerve cells, the generation and creation of new nerve cells, the diversification and, generally speaking, the health of the dendrites and the axons that nerve cells need to process information effectively. This is a nice paper published by one of my previous supervisors at university, Dr. Robin Card-Harris, who is relatively well known in this field, needless to say, who also goes into this main point a little bit more from an evolutionary angle. And they argue here that the serotonin 2A system is potentially essential in our evolution to stimulate learning. The way we come to understand psychedelic therapy is that the acute stimulation of the serotonin 2A receptor is not only facilitating these subjective effects, but it's also engendering these pharmacological effects that stimulate learning directly. Right? But cognitively speaking, psychedelics facilitate so-called mental flexibility. So in a psychedelic state, the capacity for the individual to see and experience and conclude things differently than before has significantly increased. In other words, the subjective qualities of the psychedelic experience provide an opportunity not necessarily, but an opportunity to learn new things. And then together with the pharmacological effect, create a very interesting, supportive state for learning. And this is the next thing that I'd like to emphasize before going into music for the remaining 10 minutes. Implicit learning, this process was discovered and coined by Eric Kendall, who won the Nobel Prize for identifying this mechanism. Implicit learning is literally concerned with learning by experiencing. It's a very ancient mechanism that we have adopted. We see it in a lot of other parts of the animal kingdom as well. There are certain things in our life that we can only learn by experiencing. We can only learn how to walk by learning how to walk. We can only learn how to cook a good Indian curry by trying to cook a good Indian curry. And this is the main argument I'm making here, is one framework to understand why psychedelic therapy can be so effective is because it's primarily concerned with giving people an implicit learning experience. Strong experiences, per definition, lead to strong changes. Any experience that has significance for the integrity, for either our biological self or our psychological self, will stimulate a strong memory, a strong implicit learning experience. This is why certain experiences in our lives are so traumatic and can lead to very debilitating post-traumatic stress-like symptoms. It's through a learning mechanism like this. And it plays an essential role in our development, essential role in trauma, as I just mentioned, and also, therefore, exposure therapy is considered to be the golden method to treat PTSD. And MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, which is a form of psychedelic therapy, is considered to be primarily effective because it utilizes the subjective qualities of MDMA to create a more supportive learning environment. There's many other fields of research that show the same thing. Even in non-drug therapy, in psychotherapy research, we see that the depth of involvement in the subjective experience predicts positive therapy outcomes as well. I'm going to skip forward to the music part for the remaining 10 minutes. This is the main point I was making with all of the research I just cited. It's a very different paradigm. It's primarily concerned with creating a climate, a most favorable climate for learning. A climate in which the client or patient can learn new things about oneself, but in an experience-based way. This is what I believe I came to be really confident in, to be the biggest promise of psychedelic therapy and also the biggest challenge at the same time. And this is why I doubled down on understanding the role of music, to illustrate that cartoon at the beginning. I'm gonna move forward to not talk too much about the evolution of music and all of these things that are maybe important for us to understand more about the statements I'm about to make. But the way we understand music and the role of music in psychedelic therapy is primarily based on this summarized sentence right here. Like, we view music as a non-verbal language. Music, for fascinating reasons, is communicating, conveying subjective experiences. And by listening to music, we are feeling, we are experiencing something with our bodies, with our emotional life, with our imagination. Music does not convey something concrete. Music is never about, instrumental music at least, never about the love for this person. It's about the process of love. Music is not about, never about, unless of course conceptually the artist may have put that in there, but you will not perceive the music to be concretely about, let's say, finding peace within, after having experienced a war with a nation and country. But the music is about the process of experiencing peace, the process of recovering and finding strength, and so forth and so on. So we view the role of music in psychedelic therapy really through that lens of nonverbal communication. This is a little summary of the research I've been doing at Imperial, and I've been publishing. And I'm going to highlight a few studies for you. This is a study where we looked at how the brain is processing different acoustic properties differently under a psychedelic than in a sober, in a placebo condition. We compared the classic psychedelic, in this case LSD, with placebo, and then we looked at how the brain is processing different properties of the music. And one of the main findings that we have from this study is that the brain, under the influence of LSD, a classic psychedelic, it also acts on the same serotonin 2A receptor system to facilitate its effects like psilocybin, that under the influence of this classic psychedelic, the brain is allocating more resources to process the timbral properties of the sound, the timbre properties of the sound, the tone color properties of the sound. And we see an increase in activation in brain regions usually associated with language. We see Broca's area, we see the auditory cortex, a number of interesting regions here. You can look all of this research up online. You can find this in various papers. We've done a lot of interesting research looking at how music is processed differently in the brain, but I can tell you one thing, and that is that I was most inspired actually for clinical research and therapeutic understanding by interviewing patients. And this is what we did in this particular study, The Hidden Therapist, where we interviewed all of the participants about their experience with the music. That was the first clinical trial we did at Imperial, looking at the treatment of treatment-resistant depression with psilocybin. I designed the playlist, we interviewed patients about their musical experience, and it became very, very crystal clear that music can be both counter-therapeutic as well as therapeutic. I should actually have said it in reverse. Music can be therapeutic, but also potentially dramatically counter-therapeutic. And this was what I witnessed firsthand. I saw the most qualified psychotherapists and psychiatrists, great qualifications, struggling with questions around how to adapt music to support an individual better. Not every psychiatrist is a music therapist. Most music therapists are not necessarily trained to work with psychedelics. This is the void, this is the knowledge gap that I've been working on since then in the work that I've been doing with Wavepaths. I left the academic world in 2019, and we've been doing a lot of research since then that I may be able to go through as well. Under the influence of psilocybin, the music absolutely takes over. Normally when I hear a piece of sad music or happy music, I respond through choice, but under psilocybin, I felt almost that I had no choice but to go with the music. This was one of the patients describing the effects of music in the context of psychedelic therapy. So we summarize the primary function of music in psychedelic therapy to be the providing of non-verbal direction. Music provides direction. That's the whole point of playing music. Music will influence the experience of the patient, but it's doing it in a non-verbal way. And this is one of the main reasons why it is such a potent therapeutic tool in this practice. Now, since then, we have identified up to six distinct, very different therapeutic functions of music. This is not the right time to go into all of those different therapeutic models that we have and we are developing from our research. But this is the main summary point I want to make. And therefore, it takes great responsibility on behalf of the care provider to ask oneself, how can I offer the direction in a person-centered way? How can I select music that respects the integrity of the patient that I'm working with? How much more minutes do I have left? 2 minutes, let's see. 2 minutes right before Q&A. Just going to check in with the moderators.
Yes, right, Mendel.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to highlight a few more things. So some of the research we've been doing since then is actually just simply building forth on the work that is out there, such as this paper that I just mentioned. we found that the degree to which the music personally resonates to be the main predictor for positive therapy outcomes in this trial, not drug intensity. There's more to say about this, but this was really fascinating. Then the question, of course, is how can you select music that mostly resonates with your client? So we developed a number of things. First of all, we developed a tool that can measure the degree to which the music resonates. It's a little questionnaire that can be used for research purposes. But we also have been replicating this over and over again in our own research. We have demonstrated that resonance can be measured with just a few variables. It's a primary dimension that determines the musical experience of the listener. And we've been replicating this for different drugs. Remember the work that I presented earlier was with psilocybin. We've been demonstrating the same phenomena with ketamine, as well as without any medicines involved. And let's see what else we can show. This is so-called deep listening conditions that we are studying. We are really interested in the question, how can we view music itself as the main psychedelic agent without the need to use a psychedelic drug of sorts? Not that I have anything against the use of psychedelic drugs in a therapeutic container. In fact, I think I'm needless to say a big promoter of this research, but I also do believe that there will be cohorts and populations of patients that would be better off without the need to take a psychedelic drug and would benefit from potentially a music-only approach. So we're doing a lot of research that shows, I would say, similar things than what we have shown in the psychedelic therapy research. We showed that these listening conditions can facilitate very strong experiences, and these strong experiences, if they are personally meaningful, they also correlate with improvements in well-being. Very strong caveat, needless to say, I'm a scientist at heart. This is a very different population than the clinical research we've been doing. These are primarily healthy volunteers. But given the fact that the previous work is also replicated in both clinical conditions and healthy volunteers, I think we are onto something. I think we're onto something relatively interesting here. So yeah, we believe that resonance is one of the key mediators to facilitate personally meaningful experiences with music in the context of psychedelic therapy, and thereby mediates those long-term changes in mental health and well-being. In other words, music can be that main climate that you can offer to your patient, in which your patient can find meaning, personal meaning. Not the only way, definitely not the only way. I like to emphasize that. It's simply a tool that is being used in psychedelic therapy at the moment. It's a very powerful tool, and because people are using it so widely, we need to understand how we can work with it in a responsible way. I think I may just stop here. There's a lot more to say. For anyone that's interested to learn more about the work that we're doing, there's different ways to be in touch with us. You can email us at wavepaths.com, and one of my colleagues will reply to you. And I think I'm going to leave it there so we have a bit of time for Q&A. I hope I wasn't speaking too quickly, but I wanted to get through a lot of things in that 30 minutes. I'm looking forward to take some questions as well.
Thank you, Mendel. We have one question from audience, and someone who is anonymous attendee asks, are there types of music that work better than others, or is it based on personal preference?
Great question. It's really at the heart of what we do. The more we do this research, the more we conclude that the personal preferences are more important than the genre itself. That thinking that one genre is superior than the other in the context of therapy is too simplistic. In fact, I would dare to say that every single genre or style of music that we can think of has some place in therapy and will be helpful and therapeutic for some individuals out there. Yeah. Again, this notion of personal resonance seems to be at the heart of the therapeutic mechanism. At least that's our current understanding. So finding ways to understand, this is the question, finding ways to understand what musical instincts your client has, what musical inclinations your client has. That's the first step. And then tailor music to that, not necessarily to play music that is liked in a hedonistic way. Therapy is at times hard work, and there will be challenging moments and experiences as part of that psychotherapeutic work. But the question is, how can I select music that really speaks directly to my client, to my care seeker?
Okay, thank you. We will finish with questions now, and thank you for sharing information how our participants could reach your organization and learn more about work you have been doing and will continue. Thank you, Mendel.
Thank you.